About broadly the idea of like what idealism is. So broadly speaking, Chad, what would you say? How would you define idealism?
That's a super hard question because there are about as many idealisms as there are people who have called themselves idealists.
Hmm.
Everyone's definition of idealism seems to differ. But well, first of all, we obviously don't mean idealist in the popular sense of well, like when you would say something like, "Oh, you're such an idealist," it's like someone
Yeah.
who's given to like utopian visions or something like that. No, we're talking about a philosophical view about the ultimate nature of reality.
Mm.
And in the broadest sense, I think all idealists agree that nothing exists without mentality or mind. Nothing exists without mentality or mind. And by those, I just mean something that's intrinsically minded or mind like ideas or consciousness or experience. All these things that are mental or characteristic of mentality. So, in the broadest sense, there's nothing that exists without mentality or mind, either because there's nothing that is not mental or mind like, or because the non mental reality, physical reality, depends in some way on the mental. So the mind or the mental reality is the more fundamental of the two, the mental and the physical. So
Hmm.
that's the broadest characterization I think of idealism. That kind of it's a big enough net where it catches everyone who would describe themselves as an idealist.
Mm. That's super helpful. One thing, and correct me like if I go wary or stray here, but one thing that helped me with understanding idealism is this idea that like say that like we have like we just think about in existence like all the minds, all the conscious stuff that exists. Um, Under idealism, we take out all the consciousness, all that stuff, and there's nothing left. Because in some sense, like everything's like either conscious or like the product of consciousness or something along these lines. Is there? How would you feel about like that? Explaining idealism in that kind of way?
So if we took out all of the non-conscious stuff, all we're left with is like the conscious stuff. That's what idealism is. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm thinking is the idea that like so we have like everything that exists. Just thinking about like the big blob of everything. Then within that big blob of everything, everything is like either a mind or like dependent on a mind, or like in
Okay.
some sense maybe like resembles a mind. So
Uh-huh.
if all the minds are like things that are resembling minds are gone, there's nothing left. So like under
Ah,
idealism, everything's like the mind, or like some in some sense, is gonna resemble a mind. It's gonna get tricky there, I think.
I think that's roughly the idea. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
roughly the idea. I think when we get to talking about dualistic idealism, there might be some people who would want to quibble with that, but I think that's roughly the idea. Either nothing exists without a mind, or uh, if something does exist, if something is if something is non-mind like, if something's just merely material or physical, then it ultimately depends on something that is mind like or conscious or something like that.